Hello, a very, very warm welcome back to the teaching series, The Jesus That John Knew. I'm so glad that you're with me again. Well now, we are in John chapter 9, and we've been thinking about this business of the story of the healing of the man who was born blind. Now, of course, we've already made the point that as far as the disciples are concerned, so trapped are they, so utterly trapped are they in this kind of linearity, this binary faith that says that if I'm well, it's because God's blessed me, and He's blessed me because I'm a good person, and if I'm sick, it's because I've been cursed, and I've been cursed because I'm a bad person, or indeed one of my ancestors is a bad person. And we're confronted with this man who is born blind, and the question that immediately springs to mind for the disciples is, well, who sinned? Was it the man, or was it indeed his parent? But what we've got here is this nice tension, this juxtaposition between law and grace. Alright, so let's return to the text. In verse 4 of John chapter 9 then, the question is Jesus says, we must work the works of Him who sent us while it is day. Night is coming, says Jesus, when no man can work. But as long as I am in the world, Jesus says, I am the light of the world. And this is going to be obviously a massive statement, because we're going to see how Jesus brings about the healing of blindness and saying, I am the light of the world. And this blindness obviously is a picture to us of someone being plunged into darkness, and He's going to say, no, I, Jesus, I am the light of the world who will rescue this man from his blindness. So it's an exciting motif, I think. So, then in verse 6 we see this. We see that the text says that having said these things, now listen, you've got to hear the theatre. I know I keep labouring this, but it is such an important point. Please just don't read the words. I was saying in a Facebook note recently that the Bible is a little bit like the wardrobe in the Chronicles of Narnia. And the fact of the matter is that the wardrobe is designed to be a portal. And the portal, you enter through the portal in order to enter into this Narnia of the unseen world. And if you were just to remain in the wardrobe, well, A, there's not very much to see, and who wants to be a closet Christian anyway? And so I'm making the distinction between not just reading the Bible, but abiding in the Word and moving forward, moving deeper into the mystery, to get beyond this chronic sense of dualism, this chronic sense of linearity and literalism we have, and reaching over into the divine. Now watch. Here's a good example of this, verse 6. Having said these things, he spat on the ground, made mud with the saliva. Alright, then he anointed the man's eyes, the scripture says, with the mud, and said to him, go to the pool of Siloam, which means sent. So he went, and he washed, and he came back seeing. Alright, now, it's such a great story we've got here. Let's just run through it again. So, number one, having said these things, and I wonder what you hear. It's a good test to begin to say to yourself, what is it that I'm hearing here? So let's just pause for a moment. What does this evoke in my mind? What does this remind me of? Having said these things, he spat on the ground, and he made mud with the saliva. Just allow your mind for a moment, would you? Just to escape. Just to get outside of your doctrine, just to get outside of your religion and say, what does this remind me of? Well, let's try and think about this. First and foremost, saliva was a very, very important medicinal compound in Israel. Saliva essentially was said to contain healing agents. Now this is important. So that we have saliva that contains this healing agent, and it's called histatin. If you say it quickly enough, you might get cristatin. It's an agent, a healing agent. Now watch. Now he takes the saliva, he spits, in other words, mud in the ground, and uses it to make this clay. Alright, I'm sure your minds are heading in the right direction already, but just before you dive off back to the book of Genesis, let's just hold for a second around this saliva business. Now, let's see if we can push this a bit further. What do most mums say when their children, you know, bump their heads or something, or bump their knee or graze something? Isn't the most first instinct of a mother to say, "Oh, sweetie, let me kiss it better"? Where do we get the expression from, licking our wounds? What's the first thing that you do if you were to bang a hammer and to bang your thumb? Wouldn't you go, Instinctively, what you'd be doing is you would be knowing intuitively that there is healing within you. See, sometimes we don't know what we do know. We just do it. Now, intuitively, we know that our healing, our saliva, is a healing agent. And it's an important picture, because the picture is wanting to say to us, the cure, the healing is already within us. Now, when Jesus spits, you remember who Jesus is, by the way, when he spits and he uses his saliva, which is a healing compound, and begins to make mud out of it, surely what should be happening now as we're thinking about, here is this outcast who nobody would even spit upon. Jesus uses his spit and uses the spittle to be the healing agent to bring this man into wholeness. This is very important, because you see, what you see here is Jesus uses, no problem with that, Jesus uses the vessels that the Jews use, but he infuses, he pushes into them a very different meaning to those things. And so he fills these very common motifs with very, very different meanings. Jews talk about temples and they think about the holy place. Jesus uses the word temple and he wants to talk about the people who are holy. The Jews talk about kingdom and they speak about territory. Jesus speaks about kingdom and he's talking about sphere of influence. Different idea. They speak about saliva, banging their finger, and they're thinking about remedy. Jesus is talking about inner healing, the life, the Christ that is within. I'm telling you, you don't want to miss this. So now watch this is what happens. Jesus doesn't impose any faith on the man, none whatsoever. He sees the man, he sees he's blind from birth. The apostles, the disciples rather, ask the question. Jesus moves, and moves in the miraculous. Now, he anoints his eyes with this saliva. Alright, before we jump back into the Old Testament, let's just jump back to the last chapter. You remember what happened the last time. In chapter 8, Jesus stoops into the ground, into the same dirt, and begins to write people's names. Do you remember that? And he's beginning to write names down when they're talking about accusing this woman who's been caught in adultery. Now in John chapter 9, we have him crouched down again in the ground, and this time he's fashioning something out of the clay. I know you can hear this already, because surely the whole vibration of this story is taking you back to the creation of man in Genesis chapter 1, where Jesus forms man out of the ground, out of the clay. And here we have the perfect picture of the regeneration. Jesus is doing the same thing again. The man is going to be regenerated. He's going to be born again, if you like. The man's going to be sighted. Now, so the image is beautiful, it's perfectly set for us. The man who's literally, Jesus has taken him, if you like, by way of metaphor, back into the Garden of Eden, back into the position of Adam, uses his spittle. Before it was his ruach, his breath, do you remember? Now it's the healing agent that he's using to bring this healing power to this man. And then he says, go and wash. Now this is what you call blind faith. He has to go to the pool of Siloam, and the Bible says, which means sent. He was sent there. Go. Now, Jesus could have left him right where he was. He didn't need to send him to the pool of Siloam. He didn't need to put him through that. But the thing is, what you've got to see here is that the pool of Siloam now becomes a very important motif. It becomes important for any number of reasons. Number one reason why it's important is because the pool of Siloam it's a fountain of water in Jerusalem. Now, you'll remember, won't you, the story about the Tower of Siloam. And that tower, which I think was near the pool, fell down and it killed 18 men, do you remember, who were in the business of trying to purify themselves. Now again, watch, because this is a judgment on self-righteousness. But now Jesus is going to take someone who is unrighteous, he's going to send him to the very fountain of the self-righteous on the Sabbath day, which is to break the Sabbath rules, and thus to explode the problem in the mind of the self-righteous. He's going to send him right there to be healed when he didn't need to do it, but he did it because he wants to set it up, because it's a high value target, if you like. So, and then you see this. Jesus imposes no faith in the motif. He simply bends down, he takes his saliva, he uses his saliva to anoint the man's eyes. He sends the man with his eyes caked in the mud, if you like, caked in the dirt that Jesus has mixed for him on his eyes, like a mud pack, if you like. And he sends the man with blind faith now from his begging position. He has to make the leap of faith. He has to choose to believe what would be unbelievable, and he moves in faith and goes to the pool of Siloam. The pool of Siloam, don't forget, being this fountain of water where 18 of the Jews were killed when the Tower of Siloam collapsed on them while they were purifying themselves, remember. Now, it simply says this, and I think this for me is such a wonderful, wonderful way to just climax this talk. It says, and he came back seeing. Now, I know that you might just think it means, oh, obviously he can see. Yes, of course it means he can see. Of course it means he got his physical sight back, but he got back something more than his physical sight. He got back his insight. The man came back a seer. He didn't just come back with sight, he came back a seer. And that is a very, very important point, as we're going to see. Now, please, let me just say this to you as I kind of close this section out. Let's just read it real quick. Having said these things, verse 4, he spat in the ground and made mud with saliva. Then he anointed the man's eyes with the mud and said to him, go, wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. So he went and he washed and he came back seeing. Would you please notice there is no sense in which the man has moved in faith. Faith has moved in him. Jesus just says to him, go and wash at the pool of Siloam, which means sent. So he went and he came back seeing. Here's the point. At no point does Jesus wait for the man to initiate the healing. The man doesn't ask for the healing, the man doesn't move in the healing, the man doesn't evidence any faith whatsoever. All the faith is Jesus's, and that's important because we have come to think in our days that God responds to faith. Let me say this carefully and slowly. The evidence seems to suggest to me that it's not that God responds to faith, it's that faith responds to God. And here is faith's response to God. Here's our man. His eyes now caked in this mud. Something he didn't ask for, something he didn't request in any way, shape or form. And Jesus comes out of the grace-filled blue yonder, sees him, is moved in compassion with him, moves through the confusion of the disciples, speaks about doing the work while it's night, speaks about the fact that he is the light of the world, and then says to this man, in this man's hearing, who's heard him say, I am the light of the world. And this man knows that the light pierces the darkness. Where light comes, darkness flees. And he simply anoints this man with his own saliva in a mud mix and says to him, go. And the Bible simply says, so he went. And that's all there is to it. So he went. This is like Mary when she said, whatever he tells you to do, do it. This is just like the man, the courtier's man, whose son was sick, and the Lord said to him, go, your son will be well, and he went. This is faith's response. What happens in faith is this, it's God it's when God speaks to you, when you hear a word of faith, the Christ that is inside of you resonates, it responds, it respects, it leaps, it stands up and it walks, it moves forward into its destiny. And it says, so he went and he came back seeing. The truth of the matter is, he began to see the moment he went. He began to see the moment he went. He went and he washed and he came back singing. And I will see you next time. God bless you. Bye-bye.